The Xylos Empire did not negotiate. They did not accept surrender. For 10,000 years, their fleet swept across the galaxy, consuming star systems and erasing civilizations. Their ships were living things, grown from biometal and powered by dying stars. Their soldiers were bred for war, born in vats with only one purpose: to kill and conquer. Now, after millennia of victory, their fleet had arrived at the edge of the Sol system. The target was a small blue planet called Earth. The Xylos High Command had dismissed humanity as primitive, barely worthy of attention. They watched from afar as humans fought petty wars and sent tiny ships to their own moon. It was cute, they said. General Vorath, supreme commander of the invasion fleet, sat on his command throne and looked at the holographic image of Earth with contempt. Such a small world, he said. Such insignificant creatures. This will take less than an hour. His officers laughed, a harsh clicking sound. The fleet moved forward, thousands of ships, each a nightmare given form. They expected no resistance. They had no idea what was waiting. They had no idea that humanity had secrets buried so deep that even humans had forgotten them. But the Xylos were about to remember. They were about to learn why the oldest species in the galaxy never visited Earth, and they were about to find out what happens when you wake up something that should have been left to sleep forever. On Earth, panic was a living thing. It crawled through the streets of every city, whispered in every language, and stared out from the eyes of every human being who looked up at the sky. The news channels showed the same images over and over. A fleet, unlike anything ever seen, was descending on the solar system. It had already destroyed the research outpost on Mars and the mining colonies in the asteroid belt. Now it was coming for Earth. The global defense network was activated. It was useless. Everyone knew it was useless. The Xylos ships were miles long. They had weapons that could crack planets in half. What could a few missiles do against that? In a secret bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, the leaders of every nation stared at a giant screen in silence. The American president spoke first. His voice was tired. "Do we have any options?" The Chinese premier shook his head. "Hours, maybe less." The Russian general slammed his fist on the table. "Then we die on our feet." The British Prime Minister, an older woman with steady eyes, looked up. "There is one thing." Everyone turned. "There is a man," she said, "a very old man. He lives alone in a cabin not far from here." The American president frowned. "What can one old man do?" The British Prime Minister took a deep breath. "That old man is not just any old man. He is the last living veteran of a war so old, so secret, that most people think it was a myth." The room was silent. The Russian general leaned forward. "What war?" The British Prime Minister looked at the screen, at the alien ships growing larger. "The war," she said quietly, "that made the rest of the galaxy afraid to come here. And now they have come, and he is the only one who can stop them." General Vorath was bored. He had expected some resistance, some pathetic attempt by the humans to defend themselves, but there was nothing. His fleet swept through the outer system without firing a single shot. The human ships were so primitive that his pilots used them for target practice. It was not a war, it was a slaughter. He turned to his science officer, a nervous creature with too many eyes. "Scan the planet," he ordered. "Find their population centers, their military bases. We will destroy them all at once." The science officer bent over his console, his many eyes blinking rapidly. Then he stopped. He blinked again. "General," he said, his voice trembling, "there is something strange." Vorath frowned. "What is it?" The science officer pointed to a small blinking dot on his screen. "A single energy signature, here in these mountains. It is very old, very faint, but powerful. It is like nothing in our databases." Vorath looked at the dot, a single building in the middle of nowhere. "Ignore it," he said. "Destroy it with the rest." The science officer hesitated.
"General, I do not think that is wise." Vorath turned to him, eyes glowing with anger. "You are not paid to think. Destroy it." The science officer swallowed hard and sent the order to a single drone ship. The drone broke away from the main fleet and dove toward the planet, toward the mountains, toward the small blinking dot. On the ground, in a small wooden cabin, an old man sat on his porch. He was rocking gently in an old wooden chair, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked up at the tiny speck of the drone growing larger and sighed. "Well," he said to himself, "it was a good nap while it lasted." The drone was beautiful in a terrifying way. It was shaped like a stingray, with a sleek black hull that drank in the light. Its weapons were already charging, a low hum that vibrated through the thin mountain air. It hovered over the cabin for a moment, its sensors scanning the old man on the porch. The data came back instantly. Human, male, extremely old, minimal threat level. The AI processed this information and found it satisfactory. A single plasma bolt and the cabin and the old man would cease to exist. On the porch, the old man put down his coffee cup. He looked up at the drone with tired, ancient eyes. He had seen things like this before, a long, long time ago. "They were bigger back then," he muttered, "and uglier." The drone fired. A lance of pure white-hot plasma shot down from its underbelly. It struck the cabin dead center. The force of the blast carved a crater in the mountainside. Trees for a mile around were incinerated instantly. Rocks melted and ran like water. The drone's sensors registered a complete and total kill. It turned, ready to ascend back to the fleet. But then something strange happened. The smoke cleared, and the cabin was still there, untouched. The porch was untouched. The old man was still sitting in his chair, and he looked irritated now. He stood up slowly, his old joints popping. He reached down and picked up a small gray pebble from the ground. It was a piece of the drone's plasma bolt, cooled and solidified. He tossed it in his hand, then looked directly at the drone's sensors. "You kids are so noisy," he said. "A man can't even enjoy his coffee in peace." The drone froze. Its AI tried to process what had just happened. It was impossible. The weapon had fired. The target should be dead, but the target was not dead, and the target was looking at it, and the target was speaking. The drone's AI did the only thing it could do. It sent a distress signal back to the fleet, and then the old man threw the pebble. He threw it with a flick of his wrist, a casual motion, like he was skipping a stone across a pond. The pebble moved faster than sound, faster than light, faster than anything the drone's sensors could track. It hit the drone and did not stop. It passed through the drone's hull, through its power core, through its AI matrix, and out the other side. The drone exploded in a silent ball of fire. The old man sat back down in his chair. He picked up his coffee cup. It was still warm. He took a sip. "Kids," he muttered again. On the bridge of the Xylos flagship, chaos erupted. Alarms blared. Officers screamed. The science officer stared at his screen, his many eyes wide with terror. General Vorath stood up from his throne, his face a mask of fury. "Report!" he roared. "What happened?" The science officer could barely speak. "The drone," he stammered. "Destroyed." "Destroyed? By what? The humans have no weapons that can touch our ships." The science officer pointed a trembling claw at his screen. "Not by a weapon, General. By a rock." Vorath stared at him. "A what? A rock, General? The human threw it, and it destroyed the drone." The bridge fell silent. Every officer turned to look at the science officer. "A rock?" one whispered. "He threw a rock. It was impossible." And yet, the data did not lie. The drone was gone. The science officer did not stop screaming. His many eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on his console. General Vorath marched across the bridge and grabbed the creature by its thin shoulder. "Stop screaming," he snarled. "Tell me what is happening." The science officer pointed at the screen. "The deep space sensors, General. They are picking up something massive." Vorath looked at the screen. At first he saw nothing, just the cold, empty blackness beyond Pluto. But then the image flickered, and they appeared. They did not emerge from hyperspace gently. They tore through reality as if it were paper. Hundreds of them, thousands, ships so vast that the Xylos flagship, miles long, looked like a toy next to them. They were old, scarred and battered, their hulls covered in marks from battles fought long before the Xylos Empire was born. Their design was blocky, angular, nothing like the sleek curves of Xylos technology. They looked like they had been built by beings who did not care about beauty, only about survival, and they were everywhere. They surrounded the entire Xylos fleet in a perfect sphere. No escape, no retreat. The Xylos ships were trapped. On the bridge, no one spoke, no one moved. They could only stare at the ancient, terrifying warships. Then a new alarm began to blare. The science officer, if possible, went even paler. "General," he whispered, "the ships, their energy signatures match the oldest legends of our people, the ones about the first human empire." Vorath felt the blood drain from his face. The first human empire was a myth, a fairy tale. It did not exist, and yet here it was, surrounding his fleet, and it was very, very angry.
The ancient ships did not move. They did not power up weapons. They did not send threatening messages. They simply hung there, silent and massive, a wall of metal and memory that blocked out the stars. To the Xylos crew, that silence was worse than any scream. It was the silence of absolute confidence, the silence of a predator that knows its prey cannot escape. General Voraz stood frozen. For the first time in his life, he did not know what to do. He had conquered 1,000 worlds. He had never faced an enemy like this. His tactical officers worked frantically. The data they got back made no sense. The ships were powered by technology that predated the Xylos Empire by millennia. Their weapons were unknown. Their shields were impenetrable. Their hulls were made of materials that should not exist. One officer, a young Xylos who had never known defeat, looked up from his console with tears in his eyes. "General," he whispered, "we cannot fight this. We cannot even run. They have us completely surrounded." Vorath wanted to scream at him, to tell him to be silent, but the words would not come, because the young officer was right. They were trapped. And somewhere, deep in his ancient warrior's heart, Vorath knew they had made a terrible mistake. They had come to this small blue planet expecting an easy victory. They had found a sleeping giant, and they had just kicked it very, very hard. Fear was a new emotion to General Vorath. In all his centuries of conquest, he had never felt it. Now it was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. It made his hands tremble. It made his voice crack. He looked around the bridge at his officers. They were all staring at him, waiting for orders, waiting for him to save them. He had nothing. No plan, no strategy, no hope. But he was a general, and a general does not show fear. He straightened his back and forced his voice to be steady. "Hail them," he ordered. "Open a channel to the lead ship." The communications officer nodded. A moment later, he looked up. "No response, General. They are not answering." Vorath frowned. "Try again. Use all frequencies. Send a message of peace." The communications officer tried again and again. Nothing, just silence. Vorath's fear turned to anger. How dare they ignore him? He was General Vorath, Supreme Commander of the Xylos invasion fleet. He had made species weep,
"Prepare to fire," he snarled. "We will not be ignored." The tactical officers looked at him in horror. "General," one said, "we cannot fire on them. They have us surrounded." Vorath turned on him, eyes blazing. "I gave you an order. Prepare to fire." The tactical officer hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, something changed. The lead ancient ship began to move, a slow, graceful movement, but to the Xylos crew it felt like the turning of a key in a lock. The door was closing, and they were on the wrong side.
A light flickered on the bridge, not an alarm, a communication signal, finally coming through, but it was not directed at General Vorath. It was a narrow beam transmission, aimed at the surface of the planet, at the small cabin in the mountains. The voice that came through was calm, deep, and old. "Dad." The single word hung in the air. "Dad?" The Ilos officers looked at each other, confused. The voice spoke again. "Dad, you need a hand down there?" On the surface, the old man heard the voice. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had just been woken from a nap by his noisy children. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, battered communicator. He flipped it open and held it to his ear. "I had it under control, son," he said. His voice was scratchy, irritated. "But since you're here, tell your brothers to mind their manners. We have guests." On the bridge of the ancient flagship, the voice chuckled. "Guests, huh? They don't look like guests, Dad. They look like the kind of pests we used to have to spray for." The old man sighed. "I know, but they're young. They don't know any better. Just scare them a little. Don't break anything. I just fixed the porch." The voice chuckled again. "Sure thing, Dad. We'll be gentle." The communication ended, and the ancient ships, all thousands of them, powered up their weapons. The weapons of the ancient human ships did not glow. They did not hum. They simply existed. A low, deep vibration that could be felt in the bones of every Ilos crew member. It was a sound that spoke of power beyond comprehension, power built not for conquest, but for survival, power tested in wars so terrible that the memory of them had been erased from history. General Vorath watched as the ancient ships activated their arsenal, weapons his tactical officers could not identify, targeting systems that locked onto every Ilos ship simultaneously. He saw his own death reflected in the cold, silent metal. He tried to speak, to give an order, but his voice was gone. His courage was gone. All that was left was fear. On the surface, the old man sat back down in his rocking chair. He picked up his coffee cup. It was empty. He sighed. He looked up at the sky, at his children, ready to defend him. He shook his head. "Kids," he muttered, "always making a fuss." He stood up slowly and walked into his cabin. He needed more coffee and maybe a cookie. It was going to be a long day. Behind him, the ancient ships waited in perfect silence, their weapons humming softly, ready to protect their father. The Ilos fleet did not move. They did not dare. They simply waited, trapped and terrified for whatever came next. On the Xylos flagship, the science officer had not stopped screaming, but now his screams had changed. They were screams of recognition. He had been digging through the Xylos central database, searching for any clue that could help them understand, and he had found it. Buried in the deepest archives, under layers of encryption untouched for millennia, was a file. It was marked with a symbol every Xylos child learned to fear, the symbol of the first human empire. The science officer pulled up the file. His many eyes scanned the ancient text, and what he read made his blood run cold. The first human empire, the file said, was not destroyed. It simply stopped.
After millennia of conquest, after defeating every enemy, the humans made a decision. They were tired. They wanted to rest, so they vanished. They retreated to a small planet they called Earth, and they made a pact. They would not interfere. They would not fight. They would simply live in peace, in retirement. But the file also contained a warning passed down through generations. If the humans are ever disturbed, the warning said, if their peace is ever broken, they will remember who they were, and they will not be gentle. The science officer looked up from the screen. His many eyes were wide with terror. "General," he whispered, "we have made a terrible mistake." On the Xylos homeworld, millions of miles away, the Supreme Council was watching. They had watched the invasion from the beginning, confident in their fleet, confident in their destiny. Now they sat in stunned silence. The holographic display showed the ancient human ships, the weapons, the old man on the porch. The Supreme Chancellor, so old he had not spoken in centuries, finally opened his mouth. "What have we done?" One council member stood up. "We have done nothing. Our fleet is still there. We can still win." The Supreme Chancellor looked at him with ancient, tired eyes. "Win? Against them?" He pointed a trembling claw at the display. "Those are the first humans, the ones who taught the galaxy what fear really means." The council member scoffed. "Legends, myths." The Supreme Chancellor shook his head. "Not myths, history. History we chose to forget. History that has just come back to haunt us." As he spoke, a new image appeared, a live feed from the flagship. General Vorath stood on his bridge, his face pale. Behind him, on the main view screen, was the face of an old human. He was smiling. It was not a nice smile. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Council members screamed. Some fell to their knees. Others tried to flee. The Supreme Chancellor simply sat there, staring at the screen. And then he did something he had not done in 1,000 years. He wept.
General Vorath watched the old human on his view screen. The human was not young. His face was lined with wrinkles. His hair was white and thin, but his eyes were anything but old. They were sharp, clear, and filled with a calm, patient intelligence that was more terrifying than any weapon. The human spoke. "You know," he said, "we really don't like being disturbed. We came here a long time ago to get away from all this, the wars, the noise. We just wanted to sit on our porches, drink our coffee, and watch the sunsets. It was a good life, a quiet life." Vorath tried to speak, to apologize, but the human held up a hand. "I know," he said. "You didn't know we were here. You thought Earth was just another primitive planet. It's okay. We understand." Vorath felt a tiny flicker of hope. They understood. They would let them go. The human continued. "But here's the thing, son. You woke up my dad." He pointed a thumb over his shoulder at the planet below. "That old man down there on the porch, that's my dad. He's 97. He's earned his rest. And you came along with your big, noisy ships, and you woke him up." Vorath's flicker of hope died. He looked at the old human. He looked at the thousands of ancient warships. He looked at the tiny cabin below. And he understood. They had not just invaded a planet. They had invaded a retirement community. And they had woken up the grandpas. The transmission from the Xylos homeworld was frantic. It cut through every channel, overriding all other communications. The image on the screen was chaos. The Supreme Council chamber was in ruins. Council members were on their knees, sobbing. Others curled up in corners, rocking back and forth. The Supreme Chancellor, his ancient face streaked with tears, looked directly into the camera.
"Surrender," he said. "Surrender immediately. Do not engage. Do not resist. Do not even look at them wrong. Just surrender." The transmission continued. It showed council members weeping openly, their bodies shaking with fear. It showed historians tearing at their own flesh, screaming about the old legends, the old nightmares that had just come true. It showed a mighty empire reduced to absolute terror. On the bridge, General Vorath watched in disbelief. He had never seen his leaders like this. They were supposed to be strong, fearless, masters of the galaxy, and now they were crying like children. He turned to look at the old human on his view screen. The human was still smiling, that same gentle, terrible smile. "Family," the human said with a shrug. "They worry." Vorath did not know what to say. He simply stood there, a conqueror brought low, a warrior defeated without a single shot being fired. His crew stared at the same image, their leaders, their council, their gods, weeping because they had made one small mistake. They had woken up a grandpa.
The young Xylos soldier was barely out of the birthing vat. He had never seen combat. He had never known fear. He only knew the glory of the Empire, the stories of conquest. Now he stood on the bridge, surrounded by chaos, and did not understand. He turned to General Vorath, his voice small and confused. "General," he whispered, "why is the council crying?" General Vorath looked at the young soldier. He saw the fear in his eyes, the desperate need for an explanation. He wanted to lie, to be the strong leader, but he could not, because he was afraid too. He looked at the old human on the view screen. He looked at the thousands of ancient warships. He looked at the small blue planet below. Then he looked back at the young soldier. His voice was hollow. "Because," he whispered, "because you just woke my grandpa." The young soldier stared, uncomprehending, but at that moment the lead ancient ship activated its weapons. They did not fire. They simply hummed, a low vibration that shook the flagship to its core. A reminder, a warning. The Xylos Empire surrendered unconditionally 5 minutes later. Their fleet powered down. Their weapons went cold. The ancient human ships vanished back into the void, leaving a single message. Next time, knock. On the surface, in his small cabin, the old man sat back down on his porch. Fresh coffee, a cookie. He looked up at the retreating ships and smiled. A little noisy, but a good day. He closed his eyes, leaned back in his rocking chair, and went back to sleep.